Okay, thanks for sitting down with me, Miss Lathrop. I'm excited to talk through your lesson and what I'm going to see when I come into your room. So I'm just going to ask you some questions about your lesson plan that you gave to me. I looked over it briefly, and I'm excited to see it come to life. But if you could kind of just speak to it a little bit more as I ask questions, that would be fantastic.
Great.
So what should your student know and be able to do by the time you finish your lesson?
I have 4 TEKs that I put in the lesson plan, but the main one is the student is expected to analyze plot elements, including the rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. That's the overall TEK. We've already talked about rising action. I'm really focusing on the climax and the resolution. That's going to be the main focus of the lesson. And we've kind of already pre-taught it. So that will be by the end, they can identify it and define it, and then also identify it within the story. Treasure Island.
Okay, perfect. How long have you guys been reading Treasure Island?
This is probably the 3rd week or 2nd week.
Oh, do they like it?
Yes. They really like it.
Good. Okay. So you mentioned that you've already talked about rising action a lot, and that's something that they kind of have mastered so far. So what are some activities that they've done around climax and resolution so far?
With climax and resolution, we did the whole story map.
Okay.
So we've talked about that. We've talked about the definitions. They have notes on all the parts of a story map. They're also writing their own story, their own adventure story. So we're identifying these elements in Treasure Island, but they're also having to write their own adventure story and identify them within their story.
That's fun.
Not fun to grade.
Definitely time consuming. Okay, so thinking about how we are mastery based with our grading, and then thinking about students showing progress toward mastery, what will it look like for those students that don't quite reach mastery of identifying the climax, let's say? What is it going to look like if they're on their way there? So they haven't quite mastered it, so they're not quite at a 3, but maybe they're at a 2.5 or a 2. What would that look like?
On the actual exit ticket that I'm going to give them, it's going to be, they'll probably say something like it's the biggest part of the story, or they'll probably think that it's part of the rising action when it's really not. It's really, that's actually the climax part. So I think there'll be a little bit of discrepancy there, but they're almost there. Okay. Or maybe there's multiple things that could be the climax. So that could be confusing for them as well.
Okay. So they might choose the wrong part of the story to be the climax.
Yeah, which is probably similar, but it's probably, yeah.
Some of them might feel like one part is more exciting than another, so they might not be sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So then going back to what mastery looks like, you told me that they're going to be analyzing the plot elements. That's the overarching piece of it, but specifically identifying and finding the climax and resolution in the story Treasure Island. So what are they physically going to produce for you to show you mastery? You mentioned an exit ticket. Is that what you're going to be scoring for evidence?
Yes. The exit ticket is very simple and to the point. It's what is the climax of this story and what is the resolution of the story? Because we're finishing the story when you come in for the lesson. So they'll have seen both of those. But throughout the whole lesson, it's remember, we're looking for the climax. What is the definition of climax? And then the resolution should be the end of the story.
Okay. And are you going to be finishing the story with them that day?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Thinking about your pacing of the lesson, because I know that Amplify is very dense curriculum and there's a lot to squeeze into a chunk of time. So how have you planned for the pacing of your lesson in order to fit it into that chunk of time?
Well, it's a little hard. We've definitely cut things out of Amplify.
Okay.
We're reading the story, and my main focus is the climax and resolution. So there are some other grammar and spelling components to the lesson that we've kind of cut out. Still, though, the reading, because I'm pausing and I'm checking for understanding multiple times while I read, the timing still becomes like a little bit of a struggle.
Okay.
I think we just spend so much time with discussion, and I don't want to cut it off, and I don't want to like miss them anywhere. I want to make sure everyone's engaged, so I'm not just like reading through the whole thing.
Yeah.
If I were to read it, it would be like 20 minutes, but it ends up taking longer than that. So that's still something I need to be mindful of.
Okay. So kind of a growth point do you feel like that's kind of for your whole team? I know it's been a common discussion among everybody using Amplify, but you think your team consistently kind of struggles with managing the time?
I think we've done a really good job at cutting things out, and we know what we really need and what we don't need.
Yeah.
I think 2 of us struggle with it, and the other 2 don't for some reason.
So you have to figure out what certain people are doing that works.
I think half of us are yappers and the other half are not.
If it's good discussion, it's worth it.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So in thinking about other lesson related elements, what other things happened prior to this lesson that I might not see coming in on that day? So you talked about stuff that you've already done in class, but is there anything like just the day before or even earlier that day that I might not get to see when I come in?
Yeah. The pre-teach, like we're going to review the story map again.
Okay.
We're going to review the intro, the rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. We're going to talk about it. We're going to keep referring to it, and you're probably going to miss the beginning of the story. Like you'll come in probably towards the end of finishing the story.
Okay. How much of the story do you have left?
Just 1 chapter. This is the last chapter.
Last chapter, okay.
Well, this day will be the last chapter.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So besides the lesson related things that we've discussed, what else should I know about your classroom? So this could be what the culture is like, or student behaviors to expect, maybe some systems and routines that you have set up that you want me to be aware of, or maybe your students have things that they do independently that I might not realize that you have created that system. What are some things I should look for?
A lot of times when we're having discussion, students are kind of free to talk as they please to keep the conversation going, especially if they have something to say. I'm not as much of a stickler when it's like, raise your hand, like, why are you talking out of turn?
Yeah.
During that specific time, because we're trying to like be engaged and just have like a more chill discussion. I have quite a few students that look like they're not engaged, but they are. And I also have the flip side where I have 2 or 3 that I'm consistently checking in with. And that's another thing I'm working on. I feel like I'm consistently checking in on them. Whereas like the whole class is like, okay, let's get a move on. So that's, yeah.
Okay.
Other things, there's like a couple kids who fidget while we're reading. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are some like little accommodations that you implement for those kiddos that are, you know, fidgety and need to move, or are consistently like a struggling learner? What are some things that you do for them on the daily to keep them engaged?
The ones that need to move, they know they can. They know they can fidget as long as at least some point they're showing me they're engaged, because there's sometimes where it looks like they are and sometimes where it's like I have no idea. Like if you're drawing or something. Some of my kids will stand up in the back of the room just to stay up and stay engaged. Other times it's just a lot of like proximity to the front of the room. I have a lot of those kids in the front of the room, so they can, you know, tapping on the desk or asking them questions that are, I don't want to say easy, but like they're
just
not as
checks.
they're quicker, so that it's like, hey, obviously you're not paying attention, pay attention, like that kind of thing.
Shorter attention span.
Yeah.
Just keeping them with you. Okay. And then kind of a last question here. So sometimes teachers will request that I focus on something specific when I come into the classroom. Sometimes they'll ask me, you know, can you count how many times I have to redirect this student? Or can you listen to how I give directions and let me know if it can be more clear for certain students? Or like some kind of procedure or routine that we could fine tune. Is there anything that comes to mind for you that you want me to look for specifically on top of just your domains of focus?
Yeah. The main thing would be when I'm giving direction or like giving trying to give like an explanation, am I doing it too fast?
Okay.
And a lot of times I'll say like, does that make sense? And to a lot of them, I think it does, but I don't know if I'm really reaching the ones that I'm trying to reach. Like some of them I'm like, yeah, I know you get it, but like, do you three get it?
What
And
do you
they
do?
and they say yeah, but I'm like,
Like, do you? So how do you check that in the moment? Like, do you just, come back to them throughout the lesson to check in, or how are you?
sometimes it depends, because like if I ask them the actual question then and they don't know, you can just tell like they're defeated and they're embarrassed.
Yeah.
And it's more of a like, that was a behavior, like you're not listening, so now you don't know.
Yeah.
But it's not because you don't know, it's because you weren't listening. So
Yeah.
pay attention.
Yeah.
But then I think sometimes I don't know if it's because I didn't explain it, or they're really not understanding, or if they're not listening. So I don't want to push so hard if they're really not getting it.
Right.
And now they're like embarrassed to say they don't get it.
Yeah.
Even if they were. And I think I
It's
don't
a
know.
balance of like
It's hard
when
to
to stop
tell.
pushing them.
Yeah,
It's like pushing them
exactly.
enough that you can get what you need, but you don't want to push them past the point of frustration.
Yeah.
Because then you really just lose them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or they're like anxious, or like,
Yeah.
whatever.
Or if
Because
you
I
call
called
on
them out.
them, they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also like,
You want that information though.
attention.
Yeah. Stay with me.
yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of it, but I want to circle back a little bit to kind of the beginning and just kind of give me a breakdown of what the structure of your literacy block looks like as far as like whole group instruction and group working time, small groups. What does that look like for you?
Every day we do 15 minutes of silent reading.
Okay.
So that's by themselves. It's kind of like a let's get your brain moving, let's read. They usually they could sit around the room if they want. Sometimes kids will like whisper read like with a partner, which is great, more engaged, especially the ones who don't really like to read that much. That's something that they actually do really like, which is cool.
Nice.
I'm seeing like a huge improvement in people like who are enjoying the silent reading rather than like, when you're young and you're just like this and you have no idea.
That's awesome.
That was me. So I'm seeing way more engagement with that. After the 15 minutes, we go over our objectives for the day.
Okay.
We have a slideshow. We usually will do like pre-reading of the vocabulary. After the vocabulary, we'll usually start reading, or we'll review the skills that we have been talking about. For example, this lesson is we do the silent reading, we read the objectives, and then we went over the climax and resolution, or we will go over the climax and resolution, and then we start reading. And with Amplify, sometimes we're reading a novel, sometimes we're not, so every day looks a little bit different.
Okay.
But right now we are doing Treasure Island, so that's what it looks like. And then after the read aloud, in between the read aloud, I'm like turn and talk, a lot of partner stuff with the table. And then afterwards, another kind of partner group that I'll do where they answer questions.
Okay.
And then at the end, it will be independent work. So like some group work, but like quick.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, is there anything else that you want to share with me or ask me prior to me coming in for your lesson?
I think I did differentiate on my exit ticket.
Perfect.
Just, there's two different versions. One of them has like a sentence stem and the other one doesn't. And
Okay.
like, you won't be able to tell who I give it to, but there's about like 3 that usually use that. And then sometimes if I see someone else is like struggling, then I'll give it to them too.
Cool. That's fantastic. Okay, anything else?
No,
Awesome. I'm excited to come into your room. Looking forward to it.
it'll be awesome.
All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm just going to ask you some reflective questions from your lesson. I loved coming in. You did a fantastic job. It was a lot of fun to see you in front of your kids in your element. You have a really good connection with them, and they respect you a lot, I can tell. So I'm excited to talk through your lesson. So let's start off with some positives. What are you proud of from your lesson?
I think a lot of my students got the point of the lesson. Like, they understand climax and resolution, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people were engaged. The envelope thing under the table, that was a good engagement tool.
For
I
sure.
think that worked well. Yeah, I'm happy about that.
That was my favorite part. It was so fun. And I was part of it. I got to participate.
Yeah, that was cool.
That was really fun. I liked it.
The morning they were all on the ground, but I retaped them.
It worked, and they were very excited. So, as an engagement tool, it definitely did its job.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking back on your lesson, where would you make changes and why?
We've talked about this before, but like the timing, like we didn't even get really to the exit ticket until you were gone.
Yeah.
So
But
that
I knew you were going to do it because we discussed it, so that's good.
Yeah. So that was kind of a bummer, the timing. Another thing is I think that I'm always like talking so much, and I don't know if my like stronger students are like, okay, get on with it. But then I could see in like the eyes of some of my other ones that like they have no idea what's going on. So that's always just like worrisome.
Yeah.
Like where do I draw the line? Like
Right.
do I just keep going and eventually like revert back to them, or do I really make it a point to like, hey, understand this, and then everyone else will get it too? But
Because
they might be a little
some that are
bored.
up here and some that are down here,
Yeah.
and it's hard to balance.
Yeah, I think it's always like been a constant struggle. And then with my other class, you weren't in there, but there's a lot of pullouts happening, and that's always like really hard. Like you never know when to start something, and then those kids come in and you want to make sure that they get it, but like you're in the middle of a lesson, and I don't know.
Yeah.
That's always a struggle though.
Yeah.
I feel like.
That is definitely consistent across the board.
Yeah.
Okay. I would agree. I feel like when you talked about the things that you're proud of, I definitely thought that pretty much all of your kids seemed to show, without me seeing the exit ticket, they seemed to show that they understood the story elements in general. And then especially when you had them turning and talking, just like comprehension type questions from the story, they were showing that they got it. And yeah, you had like, I think 2 or 3 that sit right here that you I could tell that you knew to check in with them, and you were frequently differentiating in your own little ways to make sure that they're showing you some kind of understanding. And I feel like they did show that throughout the lesson. Even one of them that I know typically doesn't participate or doesn't know the answers to questions, she was answering questions and asking things that made sense. So I was really excited to see that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything from your lesson or really in general that you want my support with right now?
Anything from my lesson or in general? I think maybe ways that I could differentiate better.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think like I give different exit tickets because I can use it for both block A and block B with like sentence stems, and that's really helpful. But like during the lesson or during my read aloud, like I said, I feel like I'm pulling teeth when 15 other kids are like, let's go.
Right.
Like, let's get on with it. Like, I'm losing other people because I'm trying to get 3 that just like, it's almost like, should I just take the L? Like, should I just go and go back later?
Yeah. And that could be. You have to read that as a teacher in the moment to know if it's right or not.
Yeah. And then maybe like switching it up entirely and doing small groups. Like, I know we've talked about this before, but like, if I do that, it's like a whole restructure of like everything we've done.
Right.
So that's just hard, like time consuming.
Yeah.
And then you're like, am I gonna leave my kids sort of in the dust? Like they're not gonna get a lot of teacher
you time.
Yeah, And then I know
and
they
I feel like that's when they're the most engaged with you.
Yeah.
Because of that like connection that you have with them.
Yeah.
They really are, like, your entire class is engaged when you're teaching whole group.
Yeah.
Which is not a typical thing.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a whole class of kids. It's so hard to keep them all with you. You had one that looks like he's not, but he hears you.
Yeah.
And he does get things and it clicks.
Yeah.
He doesn't necessarily show it on the outside, but he proved that he knew things later on.
Yeah.
And so I think I get what you're saying with having to restructure. It's not just about having to front load and restructure, but also the fact that your kids do click with you.
They do like enjoy the time.
They do. And you want to give that to everybody.
Yeah.
And if you do rotations, you might not necessarily get that time. But there is a balance too of like, is it worth switching it up for the next unit?
Yeah.
And thinking about, do we try this for one unit and see if my high flyers are able to get by without having as much me time and giving them more independence, or does it fail and flop and they lose total engagement because they don't get time with you? That could be too, but it could be worth trying out.
Yeah, my win groups are like that, and I've had some students say like, we never get to go to your table, like we never get to go to your table, and it's because I have like my HP 45 where I'm like, I have to do them first,
right,
and then there's other stuff, and I'm like, do this instead. So I'm not like consistent with the groups, which sucks that they notice it.
Yeah,
and I'm like, that stinks. Like, that I didn't pull you, and I didn't think it was a big deal, but obviously that was a big deal to you.
Yeah, because they care and they want that time with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so
why are they so obsessed with me?
Okay, so differentiation is something we definitely want to think about moving forward and focus on some more. You're already doing a lot of things to differentiate, but we can definitely talk about some more tools going forward. And then with kids getting pulled out a lot, how to kind of maintain that and make sure that they're still getting everything and it doesn't disrupt your whole lesson. So I like that. Good talking points.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to share your feedback with you. Okay. So what I do is I put your results into a Google form after I do my script observation, and then I just printed out the Google form itself, and so I'll talk through all of your ratings, and then there's like a rationale and comments for each section.
Okay.
So you really did do amazing. I enjoyed it so much.
Thanks.
So this first domain is planning, and so you can see across the top it has the rating scores, and then down the side is which dimension it was. You'll see a lot of proficient, and keep in mind that proficient is mastery. So with our grading scale, it's kind of like a 3. You've mastered that area. So for you to have at least proficient in everything is really fantastic. So something to be proud of. Definitely a strong trait. So with planning, we've got accomplished for standards and alignment. Your team does a really great job. I know the 4 literacy folks do a really good job of collaborating and planning and thinking about how to organize a lesson as far as the structure. And because we do such collaborative planning across the campus, you guys have the way that y'all do it works because you split up the work of who's going to do the slides and who's going to prep materials and things like that. And so it shows that it's working. Data and assessment, we talked about this. Proficient, knowledge of students, accomplished, you know them very, very well. And you're able to kind of use different strategies to not only make sure that they have high levels of learning, but that they're socially and emotionally with you and that you're able to check in with them throughout the lesson. And then 1.4 is activities. So it was clear that they were very engaged. The lesson was flexible in the sense that you did have the turn and talks that you told me about beforehand. And then I didn't get to see the last part where they were working on the exit ticket, but I know that you brought some to show me. So I'm excited to see how that went too. And then for my rationale, I'll give you time to kind of digest this and we'll touch base later on it. But there were lots of great things that I saw. I mentioned a couple students, room for growth in the area of differentiation for those disengaged students that are struggling to stay on task, the 2 that we talked about before. And you did check in with them. You came over to one of them and said, you asked him like a comprehension question and he did not know the answer at all. You're like, look in the book and I'm going to come back. And then you did. And it seemed to work. And he at least knew that you were going to follow through with him. Lots of opportunities for formal assessment of the whole class. I think that, I didn't hear that there was the assessment that I wasn't able to observe. So I'm excited to see how that went. Second domain is instruction. So super strong as well. So achieving expectations. You supported all of the learners in achieving expectations. You supported all of the learners in achieving high levels of academic and social emotional success. You gave them that peer interaction a lot too, not only with your whole group lesson, but then with the turn and talks and the table activity with the envelopes and all of that. Content knowledge and expertise, it's very clear that you have strong knowledge of the curriculum and what you're teaching. And that shows because of, like, I see that through your excitement to teach. And when you're like reading the story out loud and you're getting excited about certain parts and engaging them, it shows that you really know what you're talking about because they're so engaged in it and they trust you as the teacher so much. And so I think that's really cool. And then communication. I also feel like communication is definitely a really strong suit. So accomplished. I ranked you accomplished for that one. Differentiation as well. So I did put you at accomplished for differentiation because I feel like you did a lot of things to try to meet different groups of students. However, I do feel like even with it being rated accomplished, it's an area that we can continue to focus on because it's something that you want to focus on. And even like the strongest teacher can always differentiate more. I feel like that's the one consistent thing in teaching that we can always be working to do more of, because we're always going to have kids that are up here, down here, and everywhere in between.
Yeah.
And we talked about like the groups and rotations. So that's something that we could talk about with differentiation as well. Monitor and adjust. So very similar to differentiation, but really just observing what's happening and then taking student feedback and being able to adjust on the spot. And we did pretty well with that. I don't think that there was a whole lot of room for it in the lesson, and I think that's just because of the way the lesson was structured. I think that you did use their feedback during comprehension questions during the whole group reading, and you were asking questions and having little discussions throughout. I think those were your little checks for being able to adjust. And when you heard them turning and talking, and you'd pick up on a conversation and be like, ooh, like those kids did not get it. So then when you came back whole group, you would make sure to circle back to that topic. So and then rationale for that is all here, so you can have time to look through that. Learning environment, I would say this is probably your strongest area. It's very clear that you have an enjoyable space and the kids really enjoy being in here. And we talked about how every kid wants time with you, and so that shows through with your learning environment. So you'll see accomplished in each of the domains here, which is awesome, or each of the dimensions. So classroom environment, routines and procedures. Your room is very organized. Kids can get around and get what they need. Managing student behavior. You have a very well-behaved class. You really do. And that speaks to the procedures that you've put into place, the expectations you've set for them. They know what they are and it's clear. Did you go over champs before I got there? No. Okay. Well, then they know what they are without you having to tell them. And
we usually, like, they know a lot of the expectations that we have set in place.
Right.
When we're struggling, we go back to it.
Okay. And that makes sense, because it definitely showed that they know what they are, because they were doing it without question.
Yeah.
And when there was somebody that, like, I feel like the only behaviors we saw were like lack of engagement from a couple kids. There was not any like serious negative behaviors, which speaks volumes to the structure that you've created in your classroom. And then 3.3 is the last one, classroom culture. I think this is probably like the strongest area for you. And your environment is very collaborative in general, and it's very rare to see a whole class of students engaged, and they really were all engaged at parts throughout the lesson. Of course, you're always going to have a few here and there that you have to get back with you, but it was very impressive to see that, like, just being you and using your tools, they were really engaged and it worked. So you should be proud of that. And then again, this last area is just going over the rationale of that last domain. So speaking volumes about your learning environment. The last thing that I have to do with this is give you an area of reinforcement and an area of refinement. So area of reinforcement is something that's already pretty strong, and we just want to maintain and point out that it's strong and not let it, decrease in any way. And so what I chose for that was 2.3, which is communication. It's definitely clear that you have a variety of ways to communicate with your kiddos, and like you use certain phrases that they use in their age group that like they think it's hilarious, and it keeps them with you. So like that if you throw a joke in there, those two kids that weren't with you, they're with you now because you use that. And so I think that is a great tool. You had lots of nonverbal cues that you used walking around the room. You used the bell for attention. You had the pebble. You took pebbles out of the jar if they weren't, like, you did your attention signal and they weren't getting back to you, you were taking them out. But then if they did really well, you put them in. That seemed to work really well. And sometimes with this age group, that can be tricky. Like, sometimes they don't care,
works really well. Even last year with 5th grade.
That's fantastic.
It, like, still worked. And I think it's, because we get a class party.
Yeah.
So.
Of course it works. Yeah. Yeah, they definitely responded very well to that. And then I added the envelope hidden under the tables was so much fun. They loved that. Their reaction was awesome.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate how your one student who is somewhat nonverbal, he was able to participate, and we know, and as his teacher and as his aide that was with him, you guys know how he needs to be pushed in order to show what he's capable of. And if people don't push him, he won't ever show it. And so I thought it was really cool that with the cards that they had to read out loud, you initiated him to read it out loud to the class. And I don't know that I've really been in a space where I had the opportunity to see him read out loud at all. And so seeing him read out loud, not only just out loud, but to a whole class, and you said, speak up, you know, and he did. It was really, really cool to see. And that was just fantastic. I was really excited to see that. So that's a big win to know that you're supporting him in that way. And the other kids, I mean, it was clearly something you do all the time because it was just so normal for everyone.
Yeah.
And then for area of refinement, differentiation, which we've talked about a lot already, focusing on improving differentiation or to support all your students, particularly the ones that are disengaged or might be struggling with the material, which we talked about is really like 3 main kiddos, and you have them in a spot where they're front and center and with you, and our rooms are obviously not very big, so you have room to kind of keep everybody somewhat close. And then we talked about options for rotations, providing more individualized prompts, adjusting groupings, or offering varied levels of tasks could help keep them engaged and challenged at an appropriate level. And then I think something that we can continue to talk about is if we do want to test out some kind of rotation format in your next unit, what that could look like in a way that everybody would still get time with you. Or maybe like just that read aloud part is always whole group, and then there's some kind of rotation that happens after that. I think that would be a really fun area to think about some more. But overall, I really, really enjoyed it. Do you have questions about any of your ratings and things like that?
No, I feel pretty good about it.
Good.
Feeling confident.
Yeah, you should. I'm
good.
super proud of you. And you really did fantastic. So this is for you to keep. I want you to digest it in your own time as well, so that if you have any other questions about things, you can ask. Do you have any comments or questions about the area of refinement or the area of reinforcement for communication and differentiation?
No. You explained it well. I get it.